Hi, I'm Marc, and on this channel I talk about Brexit and UK politics. The British Minister for Investment, Dominic Johnson, is courting EU companies at the moment. And his promise for post-Brexit Britain is less regulation and more dynamism. Johnson is a long-time business partner of Jacob Rees-Mogg, who has become known beyond the country's borders as an advocate of a hard Brexit, as you know. The two founded the hedge fund Somerset Capital Management in 2007. But isn't his own jump into politics under short-term Prime Minister Liz Truss proof that there is no longer much to gain for financial managers in London? Who knows? But his mission is to make Brexit a success after all, and to do this he often makes comparisons between corporate and state processes. Brexit means restructuring, and in the end the value will increase, he says. Or sometimes doing a spin-off adds value to the whole thing. Well, in this case, the successful secession is Great Britain and the remnant is Europe, as he means it. But that hasn't worked so far, and Sunak has also just caused massive uncertainty. He has cancelled the next section of HS2, as I talked about, between Birmingham and Manchester, and a lot doesn't look good at the moment. But the European Commission and the United Kingdom agreed on 3 agreements on future relations on December 24th in 2020 at least. These put the relationship on a new basis and in particular provide for a broad economic partnership. The agreements are applicable and were in some cases provisionally on January 1st in 2021 following approval by the Council of the European Union, ratification by the United Kingdom and signature by both parties. And this also meant that the relationship between the European Union and the United Kingdom changed fundamentally from January 1st, 2021 and differed significantly from participation in the EU's internal market. The United Kingdom did become a third country. And never before have such comprehensive agreements between the European Union and a third country been negotiated in such a short time. You have the feeling it was long, but in general, in the end, it was short. And the 3 agreements are a trade and cooperation agreement, a civil nuclear energy cooperation, and an information security. The Trade and Cooperation Agreement, the TCA we talk a lot about, establishes a comprehensive economic partnership. And this is based on a free trade agreement that does not provide for tariffs of quotas generally and thus averts significant trade barriers. Could have been much worse than we have it now. And both sides have also agreed on extensive regulations to guarantee fair competition. And this applies to the area of state aid as well as competition law and standards in consumer protection, employee protection and the environment and climate, although there are some discussions in Britain to change that. An assertive dispute resolution was also agreed with the right to impose sanctions. The European Union and the United Kingdom have agreed on the framework for future cooperation in many areas, for example, goods, a little bit of services, professional qualifications, intellectual property, public procurement, environmental and energy issues, air, sea and rail freight transport, and social security regulations and research and development. So that's why it's such a long agreement. And the United Kingdom also participates as a third country in a number of EU programs. Again, recently they joined Horizon. Brexit will not be without economic consequences for the EU member states and especially for the United Kingdom. And I said will because that's not over, there's more to come. And much depends on the shape of the future relationship between the EU and the UK. And there are different calculations, particularly regarding the economic consequences of this British exit from the EU. The consequences that the different actors assume also depend on whether they themselves represent an EU-critical or an EU-friendly point of view. A study by the German IFO Institute on behalf of the Federal Ministry of Economics provided an initial assessment of the economic impact on the German and European economies. And the results show, even under unfavorable conditions, Brexit should remain bearable overall in the long term for the EU economy and especially for the German economy. Nevertheless, more unfavorable developments may occur, particularly for individual sectors. British Finance Minister George Osborne at the time, who fought for Britain to remain in the EU, warned of the negative consequences of Brexit. According to his calculations, Great Britain's exit from the European Union will mean that every British private household will have £4,300 less per year than if they remained in the EU. And in the event of Brexit, which happened, British economic output, the GDP, would be 6% lower in 2030. And this scenario assumed that the UK would not remain a member of the European Economic Area, such as Norway, for example, but that a trade deal would be negotiated between the UK and the EU. That's what happened. The economically liberal think tank Open Europe was also working with the various scenarios to calculate the consequences of Brexit. The authors of the study assumed that in the worst case, British economic output in 2030 would be 2.2% lower than if it remained in the EU. This case would occur if Britain did not conclude a trade agreement with the rest of the EU after leaving the EU and did not pursue a liberal trade policy with other partners. In the best possible case, however, British economic output in 2030 would be 1.6% higher than if it remained in the EU. So you see the differences here, depending where those people come from. And this case would occur if after Brexit, Great Britain were to conclude a free trade agreement with both the EU and other countries and heavily deregulate its own economy, which is a little bit contradiction, I must say. And according to the German Economic Institute, the IW in Cologne, Brexit could cause Great Britain's economic output to decline by 10% or more. According to IW calculations, 45% of British goods exports and 38% of British service exports go to the European Union. In the event of an EU exit, new trade barriers and bureaucratic obstacles for British companies were likely, they said, and they did come. Even with a new trade and cooperation agreement with the EU and the UK, there have been big changes from January 1st in 2021. On this day, the United Kingdom withdrew from the EU internal market and the customs union, and as well as from all EU policies and from EU international agreements. And this means that people, goods, services, and capital can from this day no longer move freely between the EU and the UK. And the EU and the UK then form two separate markets. That means two different regulatory and legal areas. And this created obstacles to trade in goods and services, as well as to cross-border mobility and exchange that do not exist today, or that didn't exist before Brexit, and that in both directions. Although no customs duties or quotas will be levied on exports or imports for trade between the European Union and the United Kingdom since the time of the TCA, appropriate customs formalities and product certifications must be completed at the border. And these now follow the same standard as between the EU and any other third country. The agreement covers not only trade in goods and a little bit of services, but also a whole range of other areas of interest to the EU, such as investment, competition, state aid, tax transparency, air and road transport, energy and sustainability, fisheries, data protection, and coordination of social security systems. It does provide for zero tariff rates and zero quotas for all goods that meet the relevant rules of origin. And there we have the EV discussion at the moment. Both parties were committed to ensuring a solid level playing field by maintaining a high level of protection in areas such as environmental protection, combating climate change and carbon pricing, but also social and labor rights, tax transparency and state aid. And there are effective domestic enforcement and a binding dispute resolution mechanism, and the opportunity for both parties to take remedial action. The EU and the UK have also agreed on a new framework for joint management of fish stocks in EU and UK waters. The UK will be able to further develop its fishing activities while protecting the activities and livelihoods of European fishing communities and preserving natural resources. With regard to transport, the agreement provides for permanent and sustainable connectivity in air, road, rail and maritime transport, although market access lags behind that of the internal market. It contains provisions to ensure that competition between the Union and the United Kingdom operators is on a level playing field, so that passengers' rights, workers' rights and road safety are not jeopardized. In the energy sector, the agreement offered a new model for trade and interconnectivity with guarantees for open and fair competition, including safety standards for offshore installations and for renewable energy production. With regard to the coordination of social security systems, the agreement aimed to guarantee a number of rights for EU citizens and British nationals. This applies to EU citizens working in, travelling to or moving to the UK, and UK nationals working to, travelling to or moving to the EU, and applied from January 1st in 2021. The agreement also enabled the UK's continued participation in a number of EU flagship programs for the period of 21 to 27, such as Horizon Europe, which was subject to a financial contribution from the UK to the EU budget, but they joined it, and a new partnership for the security of citizens. Because the Trade and Cooperation Agreement establishes a new framework for law enforcement and judicial cooperation in some criminal and civil matters, and it confirms the need for close cooperation between national police and judicial authorities, particularly in combating and prosecuting cross-border crime and terrorism. New operational capacity will be created, taking into account that as a non-EU member, the UK will not have the same facilities as before outside the Schengen area. And security cooperation may be suspended if the UK breaches its commitment to continued compliance with the European Convention on Human Rights and its domestic enforcement. Greetings to Suella Braverman here. The Trade and Cooperation Agreement therefore covers a number of areas that are in the EU's interest, and it goes far beyond traditional free trade agreements, I must say, and forms a solid foundation for maintaining this long-standing friendship and cooperation, even on a lower level. It ensures the integrity of the internal market and the indivisibility of the four freedoms, which is people, goods, services and capital. It reflects the fact that the UK was leaving, and the Union system of common rules, supervision and enforcement mechanisms, and can therefore no longer enjoy the benefits of EU membership or the single market. However, the agreement is in no way corresponding to the significant advantages that the United Kingdom enjoyed as a member state of the EU. And if you want to see more, the next video is right here in the end screen. I'll see you there. I'll be back.